Thank you. So it's a great pleasure to be here. So as stated, I'm Brian Green. I've spent most of my career making animated characters for movies at Pixar and Disney. I did work here at Animal Logic before I went overseas. And so I definitely have a fondness for the industry over here. And it's always a pleasure to come back and meet so many creative people. My boss doesn't know I'm here, so don't let him know. So I've worked for over 20 years at Pixar. I got a couple of statues as a thank you before I moved on to Disney. And this is a picture of my daughter Claire at the award ceremony where we got a Woody statue. And it's been a journey, you know. Pixar had Steve Jobs, had John Lasseter, and it helped create all these classic movies. My favorite projects that I worked on was Monsters, Inc. So I got to work on Sullivan on Monsters, Inc. And really kind of learnt my craft on that character. I did arrive just after Toy Story, and so A Bug's Life was actually, my first character was Slim on A Bug's Life. And if you remember Slim, he had the multiple arms and he got to like juggle. And that was kind of my eye-opener of like, oh, this is really fun, making characters that make people smile. Probably my most favorite project was Finding Nemo. It was definitely a connection to Australia. I got to actually work on Nemo. And I actually got taught scuba diving, and I still enjoy that today. Remy is probably a movie that I got to work on Remy for the movie for Ratatouille. And that was one where I learned a lot about appeal. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my talk. And then Toy Story 3 was just a blast, and it was probably one of the most favorite Toy Story movies that have come out. Toy Story 4 just came out, and that was a lot of fun too. Another favorite project at Pixar was, you know, we have a lot of fun and we make a mini golf course, so I just threw that slide in for some fun. Probably my favorite character that I've made is Sullivan from Monsters, Inc. And he's not just a funny character. I had a connection with him in the sense that Sullivan is really a dad and Boo is really his child. And at my stage, I had a child. And so for myself, this was the first time that I really felt connected to a character I made. And it made me think a lot. You spend so much time at work making these characters and building these connections that I feel like there's a lot to offer in the talk from that experience. So over 20 years at Pixar of passion and commitment. I've had 1 year of passion and commitment at Disney. So I moved from Pixar to Disney. And Pixar wrote this piece of software called Presto, and it won an Academy Sci-Tech Award. And so I got a picture there of Woody with lots of math. And then Disney said, hey, we want to use that software in our pipeline. So I went on down there, and I've spent a year. And I got to work on a little bit of Frozen 2 and see the pipeline, and now we're adopting the pipeline to use this piece of software. The very core of this piece of software is making animated characters. And so the whole experience is how can we make them and how can we animate them? And for me, that's the passion. And I think there's a lot that can be shared and learnt about that process. A little bit of background on myself. So I grew up here. I grew up in Dingley, out of suburb. I didn't have a TV, which is a funny thing to say these days because it's like saying you don't have the internet. You know, you're so far behind. I used to climb over the fence to the neighbors and watch Saturday morning cartoons, which was my inspiration to get into this business. I was like, oh, this would be fun, being able to make the stuff. I hope one day I can work for Disney. And so last year I did, so that kind of worked out. I went to Corfu Grammar School, Monash University, outstanding university. During this time, the whole revolution of computers obviously happened. Steve Jobs made his Mac. My dad called Steve Jobs in America and ordered a Mac, and it got delivered before anyone else did. So Dad was ahead of his time. I kind of grew up and enjoyed Australia. Like there's a picture of me there at the prom, learning to surf. And all that kind of experience of like going to the beach, learning about the outdoors. You know, you can see a lot of little drawings I did as a kid. All came back and was able to express itself in movies like Finding Nemo. So the things that we experience are the things that we can express. So I'm always telling my kids, like, get off the computer and go out and, you know, feel something. And I hope afterwards, after the talk, to go jump off a cliff. Not sure why I put that slide in, but, you know, down in Mornington, you can jump off cliffs, I hear, so I'll go do that. That's me. So our statement today is, what does the future look like? And we've got this problem. Is it going to be a good future? Is it going to be a bad future? We're here as part of Pause Fest to kind of identify and actually direct the future. I believe in myself that the animated film industry has some things to express about the future. One observation was this success. So if we look at the slide, we can see, hey, look at all these movies just this year. Toy Story 4 and Frozen 2 both made over $1 billion. What sells these movies? It's the characters in the movies. What's our attraction to these characters? Overall, they made $10 billion. So I'm like, there's something out there that we as human beings resonate against. What is it, and what is it going to look like in the future? So here's a little anecdote. A few years ago, the movie Up came out. There was a dog in there, and I thought, it was a hard movie to make. I'm going to have a fun day where we take Doug out for a tour around the company. And so there he is. He's going to have lunch with the producer, John Walker of The Incredibles. He's going in for his performance review. We need to see the nurse, So she went and checked on his health and said he needs to, work out and lose some weight. So there he is in the gym. He went to the cafe, and then he helped build our new campus. So the experience of this was people loved the cardboard cutout. They had the best day ever, touring and interviewing and having some fun. I had a fun day too. And so my observation was, if it's so fun to play with a cardboard cutout, how fun would it be to actually have a character you could interact with, on a daily basis? We haven't really seen that. We've seen a lot of experiences like, Lexus. We can have a black box in our living room we can talk to, but we don't have a character. And so the premise of this talk is, how are we going to get to that level to have characters that we can relate to and that we can talk to? I threw in this around this time when I was taking Doug out for a walk. That they were putting in these $50,000 palm trees, so I thought it'd be fun to get Doug to wee on one of them. Does anyone know like a Doug joke? Does anyone still say squirrel whenever they... Yeah, there's a few giggles out there, so... Of course, there's a downside to the what the future of animated characters and how we interact with them. So I thought I'd throw in the classic evil downside. So the premise is, if the future is animated characters and how we interact with them, well, how do we currently make them, and what do we need to move forward? So here is a slide showing how we make a movie, essentially at Disney or Pixar. You can see there is a number of departments, and there's layouts, there's effects, there's lighting and stereo, animation, and within all these departments there's a number of specialized groups that go ahead and actually make the characters. So here's the groups that actually make the characters. There's modeling, there's character 2D, and this is a set of people who could go ahead and do rigging and simulation and animation. There's look development, and look development as well. What does the character look like? It needs some color on the skin, how it responds to light. There's tech anim, so after an animated performance, we need the character to fix what our animated performance is. So a lot of specialists, a lot of departments, probably around 17 or so departments involved with lots of specialists. So it's a big enterprise. There's probably going to be 200 people on a movie at the peak all creating these experiences. My particular area of expertise is, this very specific area of modeling a character, rigging, simulation, look dev, and tech anim. So everyone has to specialize, and so I'm very grateful I get to specialize in an area that's directly related to the character construction. And here's what we'll just run through what each of these arenas look like. So you can see there's modeling, rigging, simulation, look development, and tech animation. So modeling is building the character. It's typically built in a neutral manner. And the idea is you take out all of the character. You have to leave a peel. He's building a neutral, and then when animation comes in, they apply performance. So there's a lot of talk about, hey, does that character feel like it's smiling, but it has to have a sad performance, or vice versa. And in modeling, you also get to build, the cloth, the hair, and do the shading. And these are all very specific disciplines that these days it takes a lot to learn. Originally, when we started out, you have one person do it all. So, on A Bug's Life, I was doing a bird. It's flapping around. I got to put feathers on it. I got to shade it. I got to find an animator, animate it. You do it all. Nowadays, in big production, lots of specialization. Somebody could just be modeling, every day, all day long, and that's kind of their passion, and their joy is seeing that model come alive from animation. So rigging, this is probably my favorite area, because rigging is bringing the character to life. So without a rig, you'll get something like this, which is not hugely appealing, but I appreciate the laughs. And then your job is to, as a rigger, be like, well, we need to go ahead. We need to add a skeletal structure. We need to add bones. And then for me, the most fascinating part is you've got to get the face to move. And the reason that's fascinating is getting a face to move is studying human expression. And human expressions like, how can I make a face emote sadness, anxiety, desperation? I'm not feeling any of those currently, so that's good. But if I was, you'd see it, plastered all over my face. And it's really just a study of human nature. And I think as humans, that is the core. We just love to interact and kind of interpret each other. So here's kind of a simplistic view of rigging. You go ahead and create a skeleton. There's Christoph. He's from Frozen 2. He needs a body with a skin on it. Then we need some controls for animation. And of course, we need cloth on top of it. And then you can see effects. Effects is like, oh, he's walking through snow, so he needs to push his feet into the snow. And an animator typically has this interface where you have all these little balls that you can pull around and do an animated performance. The balls could also be used for motion capture. So sometimes the animators go in, there's a mirror, they perform, and then that can be captured and applied to the digital character. So in terms of process, I thought it'd be fun to show what my buddy Matt did on Moana. So the rigger's responsibility is on the left up there. He's going to go ahead and create these controls. And he will use a system that's called PSD, post-space dynamics. So he goes ahead and he has to sculpt all the controls. A smile, for example, a smile has to push up the corner of the eye, and if it doesn't, it looks like a fake smile, and then you're dealing with a sociopath. So there's a lot of, things you got to be aware of. We don't want movies with sociopaths in them. And then here's the controls. Here's an animator going ahead and being like, hey, I'm testing all the controls. I can make the eyes move left or right. I can make them look straight at you. I got the brows going up and down. And they're always, through this process, being Disney and Pixar, looking for appeal. And then here's a walk test where it's all put together. So we got hair and cloth and walk in a cycle. Everything moves mechanically and it needs a performance. So if you look at the very bottom, this is what Disney animators use as the interface to the character. You can see, like, here's an outline of the character. You can pick any component on it and move it. And then that will be their kind of like Star Trek interface to making the character move and giving an animated performance. So that's rigging. Rigging is, to me, bringing the character to life. But the character can't be naked because we're Disney. So we need to put on cloth. I arrived shortly after Toy Story. I saw it in a cinema up in Sydney, and I was like, I got to go work for that company. And fortunately, they accepted me. When we looked at Toy Story, the cloth was plastic and awful. And what was realized at that stage is we need to have research scientists come in and create real cloth. So they decided that they'll create an easy movie called A Bug's Life, where everything's exoskeleton. And then on the side, they'll have a research short called Jerry's Game. And the idea behind Jerry's Game was we're going to figure out the math and the physics of cloth, and we'll do that in parallel. And so at the end of that, it was like, oh, Jerry's Game actually worked out. We have enough to go ahead and do a movie with cloth. So we did Monsters, Inc. And if you see the little character Boo below, she had a T-shirt. And we're like, that's enough right now. We learned from Jerry's Game how to do it for a short. Let's do a T-shirt for a movie. And then oddly enough, after we created a T-shirt, we've used it like in every movie because we're like, oh yeah, let's throw the T-shirt in and they'll save like $10. That'd be great. And then Ratatouille was, we're able to bring in cloth for the whole cast. So we moved from a T-shirt to everyone being clothed and acting. And then now Frozen 2 is like, we have people who design costumes and pretty much anything is possible to create a set of costumes that will complement the movie. So we've moved from T-shirts to pretty much there is no limit beyond money and finding the talent to create it. So part of my thing at Disney and in places is like who's in the future, who wants to come in and learn it. People come in and learn cloth and kind of really enjoy that experience, clothing the characters for the movie. And there's Christoph. I did a little bit of work on him, so I stuck him down there. So what is cloth? Cloth is a combination of realism. So the people who make cloth, probably the people who are best are people who know how to sew. Everything's very practical, and then you apply the digital skills. And so people who can sew know about weft and warp, and if you don't know what those are, go Google them. It's kind of it's fun to learn a new word in a talk. We go ahead in the way we make the costumes exactly the same that we do with sewing. So we go create flat panels, and then we stitch them together in the software. The software, there's also math involved, so we stitch it all together in the software. And then we go ahead and create this math, and it's all the same math that we learned from Jerry's game. You need stretch and bias strings and fold springs. So the idea of cloth is it's stretching, and you got to pull it together, and you do that with springs. And Ratatouille, we got to the stage where we were able to, with the math and the practical experience, go ahead and do realistic draping. And so here was just a simple example of like, if we just get a piece of cloth and drape it over a table, will it look correct? And this was one of the examples very early on of being like, oh yeah, well, I think the math is right, which was great. That was that simple. And then here is us bringing together one of my favorite clips. Cloth, all the characters are clothed, they all have hair, and they can act together. So that's Linguini and Skinner. So we have all the math and the realism. What's the extra component of this? We want stylization. So we need to bring in the appeal in everything we do. So a lot of people come in, they're very competent, they can do math, they can create things accurately, but we're trying to create an appealing product. So stylization, the first principle of stylization is to simplify and exaggerate. So we go ahead, and then you can look here and you see squares and circles and ellipses and the whole bit. This is the basis of the design of all our characters. And then we want to layer cloth on that to support the elements that we're designing. We call that simplexity because it's both simple and complex. So here's on the left, if anyone has learned how to sew, that's the typical cloth pattern. And then we're trying to create cloth patterns that have appeal in. So you can see that we're starting to exaggerate. Russell's shirt pattern, he's got he's got shorts, and we want those to be appealing. Like, how do you make shorts appealing? Well, you go ahead and you kind of do all these little tricks where you want a top pattern similar to a bikini. You got short legs, so you got to cater for those. You got to deal with the way the thing moves. So we talked about weave and weft, and so here is an example of how we're biasing everything towards movement. And if you look very much at the bottom, you can see there's flare, and all this effort was to create this kind of appealing shape that'll accent our friend Russell. So a little more detail. And then here he is. And you can see he's got great looking shorts that support the appeal of the character. Hopefully you're not looking at the shorts and it's all about the face and what expressions he does, but it really is a complete package. There he is doing our standard walk in a circle. Make sure he works in all directions. And then the software we do is it's called Marvelous Designer. Anyone can do it. It's kind of fun. I got my kids being like, hey, what kind of costumes we want to make for Halloween? Let's go ahead and then we'll draw some stuff in Marvelous Designer, and we can go ahead and make it, and it's just fun. So I threw that out there that if anyone wants to spend $20 a month and learn it, it's actually totally accessible and approachable. So hair's a similar deal. So we talked about cloth. People specialize in that. People also specialize in hair. Same deal with Toy Story. Came in, everything was plastic. On Monsters, we figured out hair, and we were like, we could do one hairy character if we try really hard. And then we did a test for a hairball, and we threw that in the movie too, because we got that for free. Then we did Ratatouille, and Ratatouille was the evolution of like, now we can have as many hairy characters as we like. We can have characters that are running around interacting with the hair. and we can have cloth also supporting the hair. And then Brave for us was like, let's do some more advanced hairstyles. And so that was the long curly hair. It was probably the hardest thing we could do at that stage. And we were able to figure out all the technical challenges. And of course, by Frozen 2, now we can pretty much do any hairstyle. Hair is a similar deal. There's physics that we've got to learn. It's a spring mass system. Curly hair is a spring mass system, but you've got to add extra curls. We have Claudia over here on the right. And one of the fun things about working in these companies is people have been working at them for a long time. So Claudia has been working on hair and cloth for 2 decades. And all that experience pushes the way we do characters forward. And then we have problems of so we've solved hair and we've solved cloth. How do we do it together? And so this is an example slide of putting them together. And the cloth wouldn't look accurate if it didn't respect how the hair moves. So that's one of the discoveries from Zootopia. And here is us putting it all together. So the hair it feels dynamic, but it's got appeal and exaggeration we've gone in. So what group does that? It's called technical animation. So we go ahead, we animate the characters, and then the tech anim group needs to come in and put the final polish or do the final notes. Interestingly enough, I've met a lot of 2D animators who will take a final performance, hand draw over them and say, hey, it needs to look like this. So the 2D animation skills are not dead. They're typically the supervisors who are giving you the guidance of what the character should look like finally. So here's an example from Zootopia. And this is typical. This is the tons and tons of notes that we get from a performance like this. And we have to go ahead and we go that simulation looks fantastic. Oh, now we want the overlapping action to be corrected. And we want to add appeal. And so we have this whole group called technical animation that does the final pass through any movie to make sure that it looks fantastic. So here's an example. This comes from animation. She falls on a bed and be like, how can we make that look better? So we need to add, simulated cloth. We will add, perhaps simulate the body. We need to have wrinkles. We need the hair to move. We need collisions, and all the stuff happens in the last process. So what I'm building up is there's a lot of work to make a successful digital character. Oh, that's awkward. Another example of tech anim. So we have a character that's come out of animation and be like, well, how are we going to make it better? We need to add wrinkles. We need to go ahead and make it look kind of realistic. Suggest we should put pants on it. Never got that far. And this was all done by a tech anim expert. So you can see right here. Here's the kind of final awkward product. Yoga with animals. But you can also feel the appeal. I find that's hilarious that animals are doing yoga in the morning. Think you could get up in the morning and do yoga with your elephant. You feel better because you're a little thinner. Here's another example of tech anim. So we go ahead and we've got this character coming out on the left. Tech anim goes ahead and adds all the realism. So there might be muscle simulation. There's kind of ballistics. Here is the kind of the final piece. So we're layering everything together. So a lot of this is done, it's on a render farm. We're running simulations. The question is, can we do this live? Can we do live simulations? Is it important for an interactive digital character to have this? How do we find all the things that were appealing that we see in the movies? What's important? How can we extract that and put it back into a character? So that, I think, is part of the Odyssey challenge for PauseFest. Here's the character at night. Ironically, you do a lot of work, and then you don't see it because it's dark. You try not to tell the artist in advance. Keep them working hard. And so it's clear that it takes a lot of people and a lot of specialists to make the movies that we do. It didn't start that way. There was a few generalists who did a lot of things. Now it's so sophisticated that you can see that from rigging to modeling to cloth to hair to tick at him that here's this huge pipeline I showed that's very expensive, but it creates these characters that we love. And at the end of it, you can interact with them. So I really do think the challenge is what elements of those can we use to keep our characters appealing and interactive? How do we interact with them in the future? And how do we, and I believe we will, introduce them into our kind of daily lives? I really feel like, when you hop into your car that can drive you, the AI character that's looking at you can say, you look tired this morning, let's pull by Starbucks and get you a coffee on the way to work. And you want that trust, like, oh, here's a character and I relate to him. And I bring it all back to Sullivan. Like, there was a character who was a dad, who was having a child, that I looked at the movie that I could create a connection with.